So the first item of business, number 2.1 on the agenda, this is a continuation of a public hearing for application A-22-1. It's a regulation amendment application under our zoning regulation 9.2.b, proposing to prohibit all medical and adult use cannabis establishments in all zoning districts in the town of Ridgefield. The applicant is Mr. Kirk Carr. And again, this is the third night, I guess, but we actually had a very abbreviated public hearing on the last one because it continued to this one. So Alice, can we promote Mr. Carr?
I can't see the panelists when you're sharing. Let me see if I can.
I see him. Here he is.
Do you?
You have to open up a different
I got to
window.
get a different screen here.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, there we go.
And he should be coming up now.
We're doing allow to talk. We're making a panelist.
I did promote to panelist. I tried to.
Okay, let me try again too. You should be coming in, yeah.
There he is. Hi, Mr. Carr. You just need to unmute.
Good evening.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thank you.
Good. Okay, Mr. Carr, sorry, as most people know, we didn't have much time to accommodate your second night of public hearing on our last meeting. So you graciously extended to tonight. And so the floor is yours.
Will you let me share my screen? Do I need to do that?
You should have the option as a.
Okay, there we go.
As a panelist, yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. See if we can make this work tonight. In the past, we've had, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I understand you had a rehearsal with Alice. So hopefully.
Right. I didn't, when I shared, I did not see the little button at the lower left that would allow this for you to hear this. I'm not sure whether that's a problem. I'm going to stop the share and come back in and see if it shows up in the lower left. And I'm going to try to share. Oh, I see. Here it is. Shared sound, optimized video. Okay. Glad I did that. All right. I have reduced this a little bit so that you can look forward to it not being an hour, but being about 46 minutes. And I hope you find it informative. Over decades, Ridgefield's development has been carefully guided thanks in large part to the untold hours of volunteer work by commissioners like you. Ridgefield and the Planning and Zoning Commission have earned their reputations by confronting issues, creating and enforcing regulations, and scrutinizing every application fairly and thoroughly. This includes the Commission's decision in 2015 to ban both medical and recreational marijuana businesses in Ridgefield. You are the beneficiaries and now the stewards of that reputation, to burnish it or to tarnish it. As perfect as Ridgefield is, like all towns, it cannot simply stay the same. It will constantly evolve or devolve, for better or for worse. Its future is in your hands, in the hands of Ridgefield public officials, Ridgefield's duly elected Planning and Zoning Commission. Hartford doesn't make that job any easier. Examples include 830G passed in 1989 and legalizing medical marijuana in 2012. Then Governor Malloy said we don't want Connecticut to follow in the path pursued by other states, which essentially legalizes marijuana to anyone able to find a doctor who will give a prescription counter to federal laws. At that time, Ridgefield's Planning and Zoning Commission passed and then extended a moratorium on medical marijuana, and after working sessions with the first selectman, police chief, director of social services, members of the Coalition Against Substance Abuse, and Ridgefield state representative, passed zoning regulations banning both medical and recreational marijuana in Ridgefield. Ultimately, the regulation they passed, which remains in Ridgefield zoning regulations today, prohibited businesses in Ridgefield that grow and dispense medical and recreational marijuana. with so many states relaxing cannabis regulations and generating taxes from it, Connecticut moved rapidly from decriminalization in 2011 to medical marijuana in 2013 to commercialization and taxation of adult recreational marijuana in 2021. Hartford signed into law an act regulating the so-called responsible and equitable use of cannabis, but giving its 169 towns the authority to regulate or to outright ban the 14 cannabis businesses the law defined without infringing on the rights of adults to buy, possess, and use legal marijuana. On September 14th, 2021, before 4 of you were on the commission approved a 1-year moratorium expiring on September 24 of this year. Here is a sample of their discussion. Why?
That the zoning commission decides whether or not it's going to have a moratorium. We decide we're going to have a moratorium. That gives the town, i.e. the selectmen, time to kick around the idea of yes or no to some kind of a regulatory prohibition on this, on the substance within the town borders.
Right.
If the Board of Selectmen, through its machination, if it wanted to hold a referendum, it could, but it would want to get some feedback from the community as to how the community at large feels. If the vote is finally that there is not going to be an allowance for cannabis in the borders of the town of Ridgefield, that takes care of that. And then the zoning commission would write an ordinance, would write a regulation that prohibited that use.
Right.
No, I totally agree with John. I think he's really summarized it really well. But for the record, I heard all of our conversation last meeting about a referendum, but my understanding, at least in my own brain, was that the Board of Selectmen was talking about, I actually attended one of the Selectmen meetings, and they were talking about potentially initiating a ordinance. And what, at least in my view, what I really want to do is allow the Board of Selectmen to run through that process, which I presume would include public input for a proposed ordinance, and allow the Board of Selectmen to do that, which they seemed inclined to do, before we got in the mix, trying to get into the detail of the how, what, where, when regulation. Allow them to run through that, and the moratorium just allows everyone a moment, the Board of Selectmen, to chase the idea of an ordinance, which I thought they were headed down anyway.
After not 1, not 2, but 3 public information hearings where the Board of Selectmen exhausted public interest in and input on the topic of permitting local cannabis businesses, both medical and recreational, here's what they decided and why.
I've heard very amazingly strong opinions, on sort of both sides, and I was just able to come to one session that we had here on a Saturday morning, which was clearly the larger one, and it was somewhat balanced. I think towards the end there was clearly more of a feeling towards no, but again there were plenty. I think I had 8 people or so who very passionately talked about the need to have it.
When we first started our Community Coalition Against Alcohol and Substance Abuse, it was after a young man, 21 years old, died of an overdose on Main Street, heroin overdose. And it was a shock. Main Street, Ridgefield, kind of brought a sense of reality to it. We're looking at taking money from something that we've worked so hard to try and keep our kids, especially with alcohol. I mean, the years, and it's still #1 in the schools. Vaping is running a very close second, and we all know that the oils that are out there, the THC content could be crazy. I mean, it's almost an hallucinogenic drug, and you don't want your kids getting behind the wheel with that kind of stuff on the street. And I do think that a store in our community, a dispensary, would certainly allow for a greater presence of it in our town, because what we have found that many of the kids who are at that younger age are getting it from an older sibling. I see that same type of behavior opening up in the community, and I think if we have an opportunity to help stop that we should make every effort to do so. So that's where I'm coming from. Barbara, you wanted to say something?
But in terms of going into the business of it,
and having it as a presence on our main street when the kids are coming out of school on a Friday afternoon and coming down Main Street. Rudy, you're right. It's everything we fought against.
Why don't we just have the motion be that the Ridgefield Board of Selectmen hereby establishes a policy not to allow any form of cannabis to be legally
Any form of cannabis business, is what you're saying, right?
business to be established in the town of Ridgefield.
That's what they were trying to get to.
How about that?
That's exactly right, business.
So we have a motion, Barbara, seconded by Maureen. If there's no further comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Barbara?
Aye.
Nays? One nay. Motion carries.
On April 25th, First Selectman Marconi sent the Planning and Zoning Commission a letter conveying the Board of Selectmen's policy decision and reasoning. The following evening, on April 26th, he punctuated that decision with a personal appeal to the Commission, reminding you that you asked for guidance from the Board of Selectmen and briefed the Commission on that guidance in person.
The Planning and Zoning Commission suggested that this is a policy decision that should be debated by the Board of Selectmen and decided there. If we were to say, yes, we want to move forward, we would send it back to P&Z to establish the regulation, location, and all the other variables that would go into that decision. If we said no on the policy, that would establish that decision. It turned out to be pretty interesting. We did hold 3 public hearings. First one, we had 4 people, the second 8, and the third about 22. It was interesting. The majority of people were against. There were some that felt it should go to a referendum. I consulted with counsel on that. Basically, it came down to 3 basic decisions we had to make. And I think Rob sent out the letter I sent that explained that we are not allowed to call a referendum on an opinion question. It would be 14 different areas. We had our discussion. The opinion of the Board of Selectmen was to vote to establish a policy. They would rather not even bother going to a referendum, that we establish a policy at that meeting, last meeting, which we voted. The motion was approved 4-1, 4 in favor of a no use policy. 1 person voted against the motion, which was the reason for it. He felt it should have gone to a referendum. And that's what is basically said in this letter here, explaining those 3 different alternatives that we had. And that's where we're at. But the Board of Selectmen voted not establish the regulation for marijuana in any of the uses. So it's a quick overview, but I'm not going to go on and be repetitious relative to a policy, which is what the P&Z Commission
In
is.
your opinion, does that obviate the need for any kind of action on the part of the planning and zoning?
Well, I would say that's a discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, I would respectfully ask that you take the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
To the surprise and consternation of the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning tabled a motion by Mr. Serena and Ms. Constantino.
P&Z referred it back to us for policy. We set the policy. It's not been adhered to. There was a motion put and a second, and they decided to table it. It hasn't come back, and that concerns me. It concerns a majority of the people in this town.
The Commission's failure to act concerned us so much that on June 9th, 6 days prior to the Board of Selectmen's advancing the cannabis ordinance, John Noonan, John Tartaglia, and yours truly, Kirk Carr, decided the time had come to put our money where our mouths are. Our only interest in this regulation is civic, not financial, and this application, as submitted, merely updates an existing, already approved zoning regulation passed by the Commission in 2015 to bring it into compliance with Connecticut's cannabis regulations and with a town policy adopted by the Board of Selectmen and a Ridgefield moratorium that expires on September 24th. Thank you for accepting our application and for belatedly opening this public hearing. When this commission passed zoning regulations prohibiting businesses that traffic in medical and recreational marijuana, it listed 6 reasons that are as valid in 2022 as they were in 2015. To eliminate any chance that an application would be submitted under some other permitted use, because federal government considers cannabis a Schedule I controlled substance, the state intends to limit licenses to serve regional populations. A licensed facility will be conveniently located within 20 minutes of Ridgefield. The pros and cons are inconclusive, and the experience of other states are contradictory. But in 2021, the state added one cynical new wrinkle to weigh. The state, in a bid to profit handsomely from taxing legal marijuana, has offered crumbs to Connecticut towns in the form of a 3% sales tax. You will soon see that this is chump change that is little more than an embarrassingly contemptuous and insulting bribe. There are basically 3 groups who think the commission should welcome cannabis to Ridgefield. Those libertarians who believe that the government governs best that governs least and should butt out of adults making such decisions for themselves, no matter the impact on children or the social and economic costs. Those who are enamored with cannabis, either for personal pleasure or commercial profit. And finally, those who see dollar signs as a windfall in taxes and development for Ridgefield. If you were in the first 2 groups, this presentation is unlikely to change your mind. But if you're in the 3rd group, this presentation is intended to break the spell of the chump change bribe that is being dangled by the state. The commercial opportunity of cannabis can be blinding. The jobs it promises, the storefront it could occupy, the tourism it could attract, the taxes it could generate. But all that glitters is not gold, and all that promise can quickly evaporate into a distant mirage. The Cannabis Industry Association explains why in this excerpted video about an arcane section of the federal tax code, Section 280E, and its dire consequences in their own words.
You've probably heard about the green rush sweeping the nation. Although the cannabis plant is still federally illegal, in the 29 states plus DC where it is legal for adults or medical use, businesses are now legitimately growing it, selling it, and everything in between. You may think these businesses are swimming in profits, but what you may not know is that they're being taxed at an insanely high rate thanks to a little thing called Section 280E of the IRS tax code, making tax season for a cannabis business owner a real bummer. Imagine paying an effective tax rate 3.5 times higher than the business next door to you because you were forbidden from taking normal business deductions, such as payroll, rent, and other common costs of doing business. Cannabis dispensaries and cultivators are paying an effective tax rate of 70% or higher. By comparison, the corporate tax rate established by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is 21%. The effect of this is that licensed cannabis businesses cannot invest as much in capital improvements or things like employee raises and benefits, hiring more employees, expanding operations, or giving back to the community. The disadvantages are numerous, from high turnover to higher prices, which drives customers back into the criminal market, and criminals don't file tax returns. Cannabis remains a Schedule I controlled substance according to the federal government, so this penalty applies to licensed cannabis businesses that operate in compliance with state laws and regulations. This means real problems for state legal cannabis businesses who are staying compliant while attempting to grow. Meanwhile, it has no effect on illegal operations that don't file tax returns. Well, cannabis businesses can't even deduct many of the costs incurred in staying compliant.
2 points merit emphasis. Confiscatory taxes impair cannabis businesses from doing many good things, including giving back to the community. Lawmakers were naive if they thought legalizing cannabis would end the illegal marijuana trade, including the scourge of fentanyl. This is no exaggeration. How bad is it? Well, it's so bad that California appropriated $100 million to bail out its legal pot business as it struggles to compete with the thriving illegal market. This is how Jared Kylo, proprietor of Higher Path, explains the very challenging economics of the legal cannabis business to NBC.
How much is a pound of marijuana taxed from the grow all the way to your store? Right now, 50% of the price you see on our shelf is taxes.
Where there is a cheaper substitute, customers will gravitate to the cheaper illegal market.
The customer's saying, what is really my risk in going out to the illicit industry? What is my
Mr.
risk?
Chairman, this needs
Because
to end
right
now.
Really what you're paying for in the legal industry is testing and taxes. And if testing isn't saving my life, why am I paying taxes?
Now to that mix, add the confiscatory federal
Mr.
tax
Chairman,
code
with all due
of Section
respect, this needs to
280E.
end now.
In 2020, we did 11.4 million.
Mr. Chairman, will you call this to order, please?
Yes, I'm trying to speak over your video. I'm sorry. Mr. Carr explained in the beginning, this video is 46 minutes long. It is not uncommon for an applicant to have a 30 to 60 minute presentation. I realize that some people may not agree with what's being presented. That happens all the time in any application. We have to allow the applicant to present the merits of their application. We can later question the applicant, and we can later discuss the merits of the application when we go for discussion. But during the public hearing, the applicant has a right to make their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
$1,000,000 in retail sales. Before federal taxes, I made $136,000 in profit. After federal taxes, I lost $80,000 as a business.
One doesn't need a degree from Wharton to know this business model is not sustainable. Sooner or later, the legal cannabis business proprietor has to face a stark choice. One road leads to almost certain financial destruction, and the other to survival and maybe to even fortune. Tiffany Devitt, Vice President of the California Cannabis Industry Association, explains how legal cannabis businesses can break bad.
There are companies that are basically playing both sides of the coin and are operating in the regulated market, but then also diverting some of their materials to the illicit market in order to fund their regulated operations.
They are finding it real easy that the only way that they can find profitability and keep their businesses open is by jumping back into having 1 foot in the illegal industry and 1 foot in the legal one, because it's the only place they can kind of fund their own business.
It was naive to think that legalization and confiscatory taxation would eradicate the illicit marijuana business.
Now that there's no barriers to entry and that there's no deterrence when it comes to crime, the cartels are back. And they're back because they know how to operate in this illicit industry. And so they've not only come back to like where they were pre-2018, they've come back stronger because they're growing more here, they're robbing stores and reselling the product back into the illicit market.
Whether legal marijuana businesses gone rogue or drug cartels on steroids, one thing they both have in common: they are much less squeamish about selling to underage customers. The so-called adult recreational cannabis business has zero probability of catering exclusively to people 21 years and older. That illegal market won't vanish because of legal commercialization and is already in Ridgefield's backyard. On June 23rd, News Times reported 3 Danbury smoke shops were busted for illegal marijuana sales. Even so, those local taxes are very tempting. But those crumbs are chump change, as they represent 11 cents on the dollar of state and local taxes. 89 cents go to Hartford, 66 cents of which are in highly regressive excise taxes and 23% in the state sales tax. But that is just the income side of the equation. The Centennial Institute of Colorado Christian University has documented that the economic and social costs dwarf tax revenues by a factor of 4.5. 89 cents of that dollar goes to Hartford. Only 11 cents remains local, while most of the economic and social costs are borne almost entirely by the community. This may be a net positive for the state, but a major shortchange for the town. And every day we learn of the increasing social cost of youthful access to products with THC levels that are 200% higher than seen just a few decades ago. And the social and economic costs can be high and highly personal. Commissioner Nenji's lived experience can't be ignored.
For me, this is on a personal level, this is a very difficult discussion. Because some of what Rudy shared earlier about research and the effect is something that I experienced personally. A younger brother of mine who used marijuana or cannabis essentially got some brain damage. And for years, he hasn't been the same person. And the family essentially had to take care of it. Personally, for me, I would probably say, don't do it. Don't allow it in town.
Guns, which have been widely owned since well before the Bill of Rights was passed in 1791, alone can't explain the surge in mass shootings. Another common denominator that is emerging is the psychotic effects of high-potency cannabis on young males. This June 1st story from the Wall Street Journal connects the dots. Copies are available online. As is the New York Times report from June 23rd about the high-potency product's psychotic and addictive effects. In spite of these dangers, potency is largely unregulated. But even where it is, as in Connecticut, there is no known safe limit. And we don't have the luxury of time to educate parents and kids. John Katz weighs the consequences of high-potency cannabis against the paltry taxes that it might raise.
Marijuana is not the benign, recreational drug that it used to be when I was somebody who would have used it if I could have, but I didn't. It's a very different drug today, and I think we all ought to familiarize ourselves with just how potent it is, how dangerous it can be, and weigh that against the possible increase in taxes that we might enjoy.
Okay, if taxes don't offset the social and economic costs, what are some of the non-tax benefits? Meg Sanders of Cana Provisions of Massachusetts told the ECDC at their public hearing in August of 2021, don't do it for the taxes, do it for the development opportunities.
Understanding of this isn't just about taxes, this is about jobs. This is about benefiting your town in a lot of ways. I have 112 employees at my Lee dispensary, 112 in a town of 2,500 people. I'm a significant employer, and that has made a big impact in a town that doesn't have a lot of industry.
That impressed Mitch Ancona of Ancona Wines and Liquors, who shared this reaction with the ECDC at their meeting on September 13th.
And I was also amazed on the young lady that spoke about her dispensary in Lee, Massachusetts. Yeah. She's got a freaking 100 and some odd people working for her. Yeah. I can't get 14 people to work for me. Like, how do you do that? That's crazy.
By the end of the meeting, ECDC Commissioner Sean Dowd raised the issue of the tight labor market's impact on restaurants and the need to import labor from neighboring towns.
There was a restaurant topic. Talking to a couple of different restaurant owners, everybody's struggling with staff, right? So it's not a common thing. One of them asked if there was a way to, to transport, right? So like if there was if there was a way to make it more economically feasible to bring in kind of like bus and wait staff from, if they were coming from Norwalk or, Danbury or something, like where the town would kind of promote some type of commute or kind of bus or transportation or something like that to try to kind of bring staff in, like on a daily basis. Has that ever been discussed, or?
The post-pandemic shortage of labor is part of a longer-term trend, compounded by inflation and the surging cost of gas. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of Ridgefield employers increased almost 18%. While jobs increased 3.9%, the labor force lagged just 3.7%. Looking at greater Ridgefield, including Danbury, Reading, and Wilton, the employer numbers increased 15%, while the jobs increased 8%. The labor force lagged, increasing just 7.5%. The demand for labor has outpaced the supply of employees. According to the U.S. Census in 2019, Ridgefield imported 82% of its local labor force from neighboring towns. Fast forward to 2022, and the soaring gas prices and pain at the pump is making commutation prohibitive for all workers, especially minimum and low-wage workers. So recruiting workers is a full-time, never-ending job for Ridgefield businesses. Ridgefield doesn't need more jobs. Right now, it needs more employees. The practical equivalency to Boo's argument is a specious and dangerous distraction, as Elizabeth DeSalvo explains.
Hi, Elizabeth DeSalvo, 57 Whitehurst Road. I don't think we should casually overlook the young people in our life, because I know, I grew up in the 70s. Many of my friends smoked pot at school all day long, and that's the difference between alcohol and marijuana. Young people, I know them still, they will, it's invisible, it's more invisible. Young folk don't go to high school and drink at 9 o'clock in the morning and spend their whole day drinking at school. That doesn't happen. But plenty of young people go to school and smoke marijuana all day. And it does have a huge effect on their brains, I believe that strongly. And so it's about the young folk and what it does to their lives. And I don't think that should be lightly, just tossed aside. Because, yeah, they might not be dying, but there might be many more of them who are sort of wrecking their lives in another way. And so I don't think that should be taken lightly at all. I just think it should be noted that, yeah, it might become so normal in our world if there's a place to buy it right down the road, that kids start to think, oh, it's totally cool to smoke pot, it's no big deal.
Don't think a cannabis business would be accretive, as existing traditional good businesses will predictably flee from neighboring businesses that are incompatible with their brand. Those empty storefronts will create a vacuum that will be filled by less attractive kinds of businesses. And just because a business is legal doesn't mean that every Skid Row business is appropriate for every town, particularly for a town such as Ridgefield, that is family-oriented, academically rigorous in its schools, that is spiritually robust, intellectually curious, culturally dynamic, and where the development and conservation and preservation thrive in harmony. What towns are more suited for the cannabis business? This is another kind of map showing the relative socioeconomic relationship of the 46 towns in Connecticut with a qualifying population of 25,000 or more. Median household incomes range from $36,000 to $206,000 from left to right on the horizontal axis. And the percent of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher range from 16% to 78% from the bottom to the top of the vertical axis. These two metrics are highly correlated with a coefficient of 0.87. 12 of the 13 towns that have approved cannabis zoning cluster in the lower left, or less affluent and less educated towns. West Hartford is the lone outlier. 9 of these qualifying towns, including Ridgefield, have approved moratoriums spanning the socioeconomic range of towns. The 5 qualifying towns that have chosen to prohibit cannabis are generally more affluent and well-educated. Ridgefield's closest peers, Westport and Greenwich, have said no to recreational adult cannabis. There are 12 other towns with populations less than 25,000 that have prohibited cannabis, including New Canaan and Weston, and Wilton remains under a moratorium. Fortunately, this legislation gives Ridgefield an escape hatch. By empowering local elected officials, either by means of zoning regulations or an ordinance, or both, to opt out of this, which began the process that has culminated in a parallel path of both a revised zoning regulation submitted on June 9th and a town ordinance proposed by the Board of Selectmen on June the 15th.
And the next 4B has to do with the cannabis ordinance. I have spoken with the chair of planning and zoning. The expiration on the moratorium is September 24th. They voted for 1 year, but I do believe they could vote to address it earlier if they wanted to.
But by not
The
having-
reason, just let me
Go ahead,
finish,
sir.
that the reason that I brought it forward to begin with, if you recall, I went to the planning and zoning
Right.
expecting them to motion and second, which they did, based on the Board of Selectmen's vote,
Right.
and that's the
So
question.
I think that was the reason why we decided to go with the ordinance, so we didn't have to put the town at risk of them approving.
Exactly right.
Right. And
Because the ordinance, they can't override the ordinance.
Right. It would also seem to me that even if they are going to consider it, we should be advancing in parallel, because September 24th is the end of the moratorium, and we can't rely on P&Z having, even if they give.
Meeting the deadlines.
Yeah. Yeah.
I personally would have hoped, I'll speak for myself, that when the Board of Selectmen voted to establish a policy as requested by, whether the policy was to approve or not approve, but they did feel that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for the setting of policy in the town of Ridgefield, and that the issue of cannabis sales is a policy for the town that should be determined first by the Board of Selectmen. We voted to set a policy.
Yeah.
We went over to planning and zoning. I attended the meeting. I explained it to them. The vote last night was the table. So we'll actually do 2 public hearings, July 13th, it would be. I wrote the 17th.
And August 17th.
August 17th with a town meeting on September 7th. Perfect. So I'll have a motion to entertain that the Board of Selectmen set 2 dates for a public hearing, July 13th and August 17th, with a town meeting on September 7th for the purpose of passing, or for the purpose of enacting a cannabis ordinance in the town of Ridgefield, prohibiting.
I'll make the motion. Yes, David.
And I'll second.
So we have a motion made and seconded, Bob and Barbara. Any further debate? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0.
Rob Hendrick joins the discussion, arriving a little later.
Just out of curiosity, what happens if the moratorium lapses? Right, so, again, probably you will take care of that, it's probably not an issue, but if it did in fact lapse, what's the worst case scenario, what could happen?
I think there's probably two ways to answer that. So, first of all, from the state perspective, the state has to license these businesses. And so, the state may or may not license a business within Ridgefield. We can't control the state licensing process. But in terms of Ridgefield regulations, actually, it was Mr. Carr, I have to give him credit, that spotted a very small subset of our medical marijuana regulation actually does prohibit.
You're right.
And we didn't discuss this, by the way, when we did our moratorium.
Because I didn't see it.
There is language a bit buried, but it's in the medical marijuana section that prohibits the, I believe the words are the growth and distribution, I believe are the words.
For dispensing.
Dispensing, thank you. Growth and dispensing of marijuana. These are the words.
I think it's recreational. I think
Yeah.
it says recreational.
It just says marijuana, I believe, in Ridgefield. Now, I've talked to Mr. Beecher. This is one of the 3 things that we asked Tom Beecher in the few weeks when we sort of needed to pull back and just understand what they've done. So I talked to Mr. Beecher about, well, how does that regulation either help or hinder? How does it interpret the new regulations?
Because our regulation was written a long time ago.
Oh,
It wasn't actually that long ago, but it was just long enough ago that it's not written with the current statute in mind.
Right.
So the answer from Mr. Beecher was that it would be good for us to rewrite, basically, that regulation. It's interesting, but it's probably causing more question marks than answers for us going forward. If you voted for your policy, and to Mr. Connolly's point, if you had your policy in place and we let the moratorium expire, then as a community, we're collectively in an ambiguous legal spot. Because you do have this policy, but we don't have an ordinance, we don't have a regulation. And the statute says they need either an ordinance or regulation.
Mr. Marconi?
Yes.
The exact language, this is in 7.13B2. Dispensing and growing of recreational marijuana is also prohibited within the town of Ridgefield and shall not be permitted unless expressly authorized in these regulations.
And it's the dispensing, growing marijuana, it's those three words that.
Well, recreational also, recreational marijuana.
But it's not.
And that will survive after the moratorium. The question is, would it prevent it if somebody brought in an application for a micro cultivator or something?
Right.
Could they do that?
And the advice of counsel is that we would likely face a legal challenge.
So the Board of Selectmen conducted their 4th and 5th public hearings, followed by a town meeting on September the 7th. Before the commission finalized its referral list on this application on July 26, Alice Dew had sent referral letters to the police chief and health department director. As of August 12th, only 2 of these referral letters have been filed with the Land Use Office to the Board of Selectmen and to the ECDC. One is expected to also go to the Board of Finance. The only 2 responses received are unanimously in support of the amended regulation. Police Chief Jeff Kreitz cryptically responded, "Definitely the correct move." Ridgefield Health Director Ed Briggs supports banning marijuana stores in town because marijuana use increases mental health issues such as depression and psychosis and memory loss in young adults. Colorado has experienced an increase in crime, traffic accidents, emergency room visits, and hospitalizations. Mr. Briggs is particularly concerned with edibles containing THC that cause enhanced effects and can easily get in the hands of children. He urges the commission to do its job and not to allow these stores in Ridgefield. On August the 8th, Rob Hendrick sent referral letters regarding this application to the ECDC and Board of Selectmen. That is 62 days after the commission received this application and just 8 days before opening the public hearing, and 15 weeks after receiving this letter from the Board of Selectmen. Clearly, the Board of Selectmen stated plainly the town policy prohibits all cannabis businesses. The only thing that changed is that the reaction to the commission's non-action, the town proceeded through a parallel process to transform that policy into a town meeting approved ordinance. And the ECDC called a special meeting on the morning of August 16th, and Ms. Norwitt reported that commission voted unanimously to oppose this application, which came as quite a surprise. At the ECDC meeting on September 12th, Ms. Norwitt had to acknowledge that the meeting was not properly noticed and illegal and all business conducted null and void, including the letter she read to this commission.
First thing I want to do is approval of the August 2022 minutes. Our meeting of August 16 was deemed an illegal meeting because we didn't give adequate notice, so we're not going to review those minutes.
The ECDC seems to forget that it is a commission appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Once the Selectmen set a town policy, continuing to oppose it publicly is an act of insubordination. Later in this meeting, they vote unanimously once again in support of the letter of opposition, now in defiance of a duly approved town ordinance for which they must be held accountable. So now, from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of August the 16th. Fast forward to September 7th and the town meeting to consider and vote on the ordinance. 188 fellow Ridgefielders, many of you included, came out to make the fateful decision. Okay, there was There were no pitchforks or torches, but there was plenty of energy and passion in the room. Here's a condensation of that 90-minute meeting for anyone who may have missed it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We're going to go ahead and call to order the town meeting for this evening. The purpose of the town meeting, we have 4 items on our agenda this evening. What we're going to do is move the question about cannabis to be question number 1 at the town meeting.
So everybody now has one of these. You are going to write on the back.
Still
yes.
people outside.
We are going to take care of those people. If they haven't gotten one of these yet, they will have to now wait online. But those people who have it can go now. What you are going to do is write yes or no on the back of this. Only yes or no. Not yay or nay. Yes or no. And you are going to put it in this box.
Now we can borrow one from Tim.
Mr. Marconi and I are going to okay? Do that now. Do that now. Yes or no. Put it in the box and leave if you'd like to. Is there any further business to come before the meeting? No, hold on.
Yes.
Hold on.
The tally.
Hold on. We have the tally from the cannabis ordinance. There 188 people voted. 144 voted for the ordinance. 43 voted against the ordinance. There was 1 blank ballot. The motion passes. The ordinance is confirmed. Is there any other business to come before the meeting? There being none, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
The result was decisive, 76.6 in favor of the ordinance, 22.9% opposed, and 1 blank ballot. Thank you for extending the moratorium in the event of a different outcome from the town meeting by extending it to December 16th. That has provided time to amend the application to reflect the ordinance, which has been shared with the Commission's attorney, with whom the applicant spoke last Wednesday, to make sure that he had this revision and the approved ordinance, and to offer to revise it in just about any way he recommends and that the Commission would accept, to avoid prolonging this process any longer than absolutely necessary. Or the Commission may want to start all over from scratch and make it a DIY project that could take the Commission months to complete. Here are the top 12 reasons to approve this application tonight. A pot shop is demographically and culturally incompatible with Ridgefield and will drive out good business, creating a vacuum that attracts other Skid Row businesses. Today's THC potency is excessive and addictive, producing psychosis and depression. Because of confiscatory taxes, the legal cannabis business is unsustainable, corrupting the legal cannabis space and fueling the illicit market, resulting in unrestrained sales of pot to kids. The social and economic costs dwarf the tax revenues that go mostly to the state, while the costs stay with the community. This application merely updates an existing Ridgefield zoning regulation that banned both medical and recreational marijuana in 2015. The reasons given by the Commission in 2015 are just as valid in 2022 as they were then. The Board of Selectmen were surprised when the Commission failed to take your cue from the town policy and promulgated an ordinance, which was overwhelmingly approved by the town meeting. And the number 1 reason to approve this regulation is to fulfill your oath of office and to embrace the will of the people as pledged by Mr. Hendrick to the Board of Selectmen.
So to answer your question, Sean, we think it's appropriate to either extend the moratorium and or pass a regulation. Everything's clear. One way or another.
Okay.
And Planning and Zoning Commission has every intention of doing that. And we're happy to take on the issue, but we don't think it's appropriate to take on the issue and kind of get the public all drummed up at the same time that you're trying to do an ordinance.
Over the decades, the Planning and Zoning Commission has burnished its reputation with responsive, well-crafted, and fairly enforced zoning regulations. This is no time to leave a now outdated regulation on the books or to unnecessarily squander months of the Commission's precious time reinventing the wheel. This application helps you update that regulation to comply with state statute, the town's policy, and now its town meeting approved the ordinance. Thank you for watching. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. So before we jump into open conversation, let me just clarify kind of procedurally we've got some people attending, et cetera. So this is a public hearing. At this point, members of the commission traditionally interact with the applicant. Actually, normally an applicant has a more interactive presentation, so we kind of interact as we go and question things as we go. But this applicant made kind of a more production related presentation. So why don't we take, if there are any questions for the applicant, now is probably the time to do that. What we should not do, just to set some ground rules so we don't get off track too much. Now is not the time, just as a reminder, most commissioners know this, all of you probably do in your head. Now is not the time to actually argue your opinion as a commissioner. Remember that after we close the public hearing, then we have a time to debate, discuss, and vote after the public hearing. That's when we have our discussion. But Mr. Carr, this is his time now for us to be able to interact with him, ask him questions, clarifications, et cetera. Once that interaction with Mr. Carr is done, which is kind of normal for all applicants, Alice, traditionally staff, provides an opinion, any review, legal advice, et cetera, that we sought. So if there's no questions from the commissioners or after questions from the commissioners, we'll give Alice a little time, and then we'll follow all the normal procedure. We'll then take a moment, a breath, and see if there's any questions or comments from the audience, members in attendance, in the public, because that's normally part of our public hearing as well. After those couple things are done, then we'll be able to close the public hearing, and then we have to move on with our agenda for tonight. And the rest of our agenda for tonight does include time for the commission members to discuss and potentially vote on this application. But that will be later in the meeting after we get a couple other items of business done. So just a recap of our normal process. So I'll take a breath. Commissioners, is there any question, discussion that you'd like to have with Mr. Carr before we go to staff report? Going once, going twice.
Mr. Carr, you said the number one reason to approve it is because this is what the public have voted for.
I said that this was the number one reason was to fulfill your oath of office, which certainly should reflect the will of the people, which is certainly embodied in the town ordinance. Yes.
Okay. Just to clarify though, how this application was submitted without the extension for hearings, we would have had to vote on this application prior to hearing the will of the people.
I believe the will of the people was represented in the town policy after 3 public hearings. Now it's indelible in the ordinance, but so we had that discussion previously. I think Mr. Hendrick asked me about that. But now you do have an ordinance, and that we have revised the application to reflect the ordinance. And so, I think that stands as stated.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Mr. Katz, we can hear you.
Yes, I just would like to make the point that contrary to what Mr. Carr said, it is not the purpose of the Planning and Zoning Commission to reflect the will of the people. This is not an RTM. This is a Planning and Zoning Commission, and it's our responsibility to take into consideration all the facts that are presented at a public hearing
and try to weigh them and come up with a sensible decision to benefit the town. It is definitely not to represent the will of the people per se, as has been demonstrated many times when a zoning application may receive a great deal of negative publicity and input, and yet it is the responsibility of the commission to approve it because it meets the regulations that we have established. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you, Mr. Katz.
Mr. Chairman, further to that point, as recorded by Mr. Carr, we put a motion in place to shoot down any cannabis established in any shape, manner, or form a while ago. And on the good counsel by fellow Commissioner Mr. Katz, it was presented that we should check with town council so that there are no loopholes. And thus I retracted my motion. And because of it, the town and the people voted that we have no other loopholes. We're not lawyers. To Mr. Katz's point, as well, you know, Mr. Commissioner, we govern based on the regulations that we are required to follow. So based on good counsel, we presented it that way. And thankfully, we got counsel back and the town voted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Serna. Any other questions or discussion that needs to be had with Mr. Carr from the commission? Okay, Alice, want to give us an overview?
Sure. Well, I had done a summary initially, excuse me, and then Rob, you and I spoke with Tom Beecher concerning how to go forward. My summary says that the ordinance was approved on September 7th, prohibiting cannabis establishments in the town of Ridgefield. The Planning and Zoning Commission have a moratorium in place until December 22nd, 2022. Attorney Beecher has reviewed Mr. Carr's revised regulations. It was suggested that the commission deny regulation change application 822-1 and propose a revision to the current regulation 7.13 and 8.6. This would be a zone change application by the commission, which would necessitate a public hearing. And it's suggested we put on the agenda for October 11th for a public hearing on November 9th. Due to the late date, actually, that should be October 25th.
Right.
The commission should take time to review the suggestions by the Ridgefield Land Use Attorney, Tom Beecher, to change the wording of the regulation 7.3 cannabis establishments and section 8.6 uses subject to moratorium. And I did send everybody the suggested wording.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. Just for clarification, I guess, again, just trying to make sure we follow our normal process. Very often at this stage, we would also have consultants that might advise us. So Mr. Carr's made a presentation that's obviously he's obviously an advocate for himself. Traditionally, in an application like this, we might have engaged consultants or others to review the application on behalf of the commission and give us advice, numbers, data, analysis, et cetera. We've actually decided not to do that so as not to burden Mr. Carr with this expense because applicants pay for that. So we're skipping that step that's common. Mr. Carr, do you want to say something before we go to the audience?
Well, I would like to say that I checked the point view today or whatever it's called, and I did not see anything from Mr. Beecher. I think if he has material, nor did I see the staff report. It seems that if those two documents relate to this application, that the applicant should have a right to examine it. And I've not had that opportunity. Furthermore, when I spoke to Mr. Beecher, I explained to him that as the applicant, we were prepared to make any amendments to this proposed application that he would request, and that would be acceptable to the commission. You certainly have a right to start over again. And to have another public hearing. You can prolong this if you want to. I mean, the ordinance is in fact in place. You can take as much time as you want to. I don't see anything really constructive from doing that. At least having another public hearing. You've had 5 by the Board of Selectmen. I think this is the 3rd one that you've had with me. I think you're beating a dead horse, but that's your prerogative.
Mr. Carr, just for clarification, Board of Selectmen public hearing is not considered testimony to the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're separate entities with a separate legal record. So it's one of the things that we tried to explain to you much earlier in this process. When you wanted us to preempt the ordinance, we explained that actually we need to hold those same public hearings just like the Board of Selectmen had done in the spring. So unfortunately, and I don't make these rules, I'm just reiterating them. Unfortunately, those 3 Board of Selectmen meetings that were earlier in this year essentially don't count for our legal record. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it works.
Well, you've had 3. I've extended additional days.
And we did.
You've had 3 of your own. You can have a 4th one of your own. You can have a 5th one, 6th one. I don't, but I think you're
Mr. Carr, I think our intention is to close the public hearing tonight.
Right,
and,
okay.
and the only reason we actually had 3 is because you couldn't make the video work on the first night.
Right.
This video that you just showed, you tried to show on the first night, you had problems with the audio. We continued it to a second night, and we didn't have time to accommodate you on the second night. So we had a 5-minute conversation and we asked you to come back here. So now we've listened to your 46-minute presentation that we expected you to make on the first night, on the first public hearing. So I apologize that it's prolonged, but it's not really us that's prolonged in this case. Is there anything else?
I think to my point about both the staff report and the attorney's document not being properly recorded.
Mr. Carr, attorney-client communications are privileged, as you, I'm sure, understand. So we very regularly have conversations with Mr. Beecher where he advises us on applications. And we are his client. Planning.
I got it. Okay.
So that's attorney-client privileged information. Staff report, I'll make sure that we do have it posted. I think Alice is probably just delivering it now and needs to post it.
I just did upload it to the file. I apologize if there's a lot of documents and I just neglected.
And it's traditional that we present the staff report in the public hearing and post it online. So we'll make sure that's done.
Thank you.
And it is now.
All right. All right, if there's nothing else from the commission, I'll go to see if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this topic. I don't see anybody. Okay, again, try to follow normal process here, Mr. Carr. Normally we swing around to see if you have any kind of closing comments. There's no further questions from the commission at this time. There's no further.
I'd like to bring up one point, if I might.
Yep. Mr. Katz.
In the intent and purpose, I think we need to straighten out the language a little bit. If you look at starting with equitable regulation of adult use cannabis in the 3rd line, and in compliance with Ridgefield Town Ordinance 356-1 through the next one, is to prohibit all medical and adult use cannabis establishments as defined. I think you probably wanted to say is to prohibit all medical use and adult use of cannabis and cannabis establishments as defined. It doesn't say that.
Thank you, John. Actually, I think that's one of a number of changes that Mr. Beecher would recommend, and that's why his summary recommendation to us is to deny this application to construct a proper regulation amendment that he's comfortable with, that we should be comfortable with, that complies with the ordinance, rather than accepting Mr. Carr's draft.
I agree with that, but I also think that there's room to discuss the rationale for having any kind of a regulation prohibiting it in the zoning regulations, considering the fact that it is a town-wide prohibition that takes precedence over anything we might do at the table.
That's a good point. Okay, is there any further discussion? Mr.
Yeah.
Carr?
May I just add that you do have a regulation on your zoning, in your zoning regulations that has been outdated by the state statute, now by town policy and town ordinance. And I presume that Mr. Beecher is reflecting that. I haven't seen what he's proposed. I did explain to him that as the applicant, we would probably accept just about anything he wanted to put in there. If you want to start over again, if that's what you want to do, that's your prerogative.
Right. We're very aware of the section. As it was actually in your 46-minute video, a discussion that I had with the Board of Selectmen about that section. And we had a pretty thorough review of that section back in May with Attorney Beecher. So we're prepared to edit that as necessary now that the ordinance has been passed, which is what we were all waiting for. Okay. Is there anything further for this public hearing? I'd like to take a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
Okay.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Okay.
Second.
It's moved by Mr. Katz, seconded by Mr. Serena. I heard him first, so we'll give it to him. All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Mr. Katz, you have to verbalize your.
Yes, thank you. I'm in favor of that. I made the motion.
You made the motion, so. Okay, any opposed? All right, public hearing's closed. Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Thank you.
All right, next item on our agenda is 3.1. Now we're, if the public hearing is closed, which it is for A-22-1, this is the regulation amendment application for medical and adult use cannabis establishments in all zoning districts. We can have some discussion on this. We can act on this. We can have a motion to approve or deny.
Rob, can you clarify that if we approve or deny, what that really means?
Yep. So first, just in terms of options, so we can have a discussion tonight. We could table discussion. We have 65 days now that the public hearing is closed. We have 65 days before we need to take a vote. So we don't need to act on this tonight, but certainly if there's consensus and everybody wants to move forward, then we should do that quickly so that we don't, have Mr. Carr sitting around waiting. If we approve his application, then we are approving his application in its entirety, in all of its wording, including intent and purposes and the findings of the commission. We're essentially accepting everything that he's presented to us in the documentation, and we're enacting that regulation as he's drafted it. That's what would happen if we approve. We can deny his application. And as Alice has said, that's Mr. Beecher's advice, by the way, that we should deny it, not because we disagree with the fundamental question, because in fact, we have an ordinance and the matter is settled in town, but that the commission and its staff should draft our regulation amendments. And Mr. Beecher would like to do that. So that's his advice. But so we can approve or deny or table, or we can have some discussion and then make one of those decisions. So we need a motion.
I'd like to ask Mr. Carr a question, if I may.
You
Still
can't,
there?
the public hearing is closed.
No, he can, I can ask him a question, can I not?
No, the public hearing is closed. That's.
So Rob, to clarify, if we approve the motion or I'm sorry, what Mr. Carr is suggesting, what does that mean? Because fundamentally it is an ordinance that the Board of Selectmen and the public have voted on. Right? All we're gonna do at once, if we select to deny it, is then follow up with the suggestion of counsel, Mr. Beecher, to make sure our regulations from the planning and zoning standpoint mirrors the protection. Is that correct?
That's right. It's a relatively minor exercise to just a few things in our regulations to basically reference the ordinance, which is superior.
So for something like a legislation like this, my personal opinion is that it's important that it originates from the commission and our council. So my I mean, the town has spoken, the ordinance is passed, and I believe that we should do whatever our council recommends we should do to uphold that ordinance. But I think it should be originating from planning and zoning, not an applicant. And there were pieces of the application that I did disagree with. There was a rendering of a cannabis facility on Main Street if it passed, which we don't even know if that's true. So I would recommend following the advice of counsel, denying the application, and then following whatever Tom's speaker's advice is that we need to do or not do or update in our zoning laws to follow the ordinance that the town passed.
I 100% agree with Mariah. That's Elizabeth.
I make a motion to deny the application of the special hearing, to deny the application and to change or follow the ordinance that the first selectman and the town has voted on.
I think Mr. Stern, I think the motion can be as easy as denying the application.
I default to council and chair.
I second the motion.
I'm sorry, you do have to make reasons. You do have to give reasons for the denial.
For the denial, yep.
I believe that legal counsel, as well as the fact that the town has voted, the population was allowed to vote and denied the whatever the heck you call it, the issue that was at hand, that an ordinance was passed by the town by public election, that I vote or I make a motion to deny the application.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a second?
I agree with that. I was going to ask Mr. Carr to explain why he thinks we should indeed pass this, considering the fact that the town has already forbidden it through ordinance. And I do believe, and I'm not challenging the chair at this point, but I do believe that because the applicant would be the person who would contest whatever was said, and I would be somebody who might contest what he said, that I would have had the right to do that, even though it's post-public hearing. But that's a moot point at the moment, because I think this motion should carry as it is to deny.
If I were to get the applicant right, one of the things he said, John, is that we need to upgrade our regulation. We have something there that's now not dated. So that's one of the things he gave as a reason.
I know he would like us to see it.
I do think that the onus on updating regulations and drafting the verbiage should be on our town council, not on someone outside of the town council.
Yeah, I mean, guys, I made a motion 6 months ago to stop this. And on the recommendation of my fellow respected commissioner, Mr. Katz, it was brought to everybody's attention that we don't want to make a loophole here, and our town council should really be involved. Thus, I retracted our motion. I believe that since it went to the selectmen and actually went to a public vote, the public speaks. If we can't listen to the public, that's a different problem. But beyond that, I agree with Mariah that we should talk to Tom and our public counsel and make sure if there's anything else we can do as the Planning and Zoning Commission under our regulations, we should try and do it to make sure that this is stopped. Period. The end.
We should not downplay the point that Mr. Carr brought to us. One of the points that he made, which I think I completely agree, is that if we have regulations on the book that is outdated, part of our job is to update it. And we may not have to go with what he suggested to update it, but we have an opportunity to revisit it, given now that the selectmen had passed, we now have an ordinance that in essence governs the rule of cannabis, and also to be in line with the state law. So I think there's need to update our regulation. That's one point that I would agree completely with Mr. Carr.
Yep.
It's not dated.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I think we all agree with that point. You know, that when we established this moratorium, I think we all recognized that the issue needed to be settled and quick. When I was made chair in late November, I went to a Board of Selectmen meeting in January, and anybody can pull that record. Mr. Carr is very good at pulling old videos. I actually said there, and I presented them a list of top priorities that I thought they needed to focus on. And this cannabis issue was one of those, and that I pointed out to them that the clock was ticking, and that when we passed the moratorium, the reason that we passed the moratorium, which was actually in the video, I said it myself, and it was in Mr. Carr's video, we passed that moratorium because they signaled their intent to pursue an ordinance, and they needed to act quickly. They wanted to have public hearings, and then they needed to go get an ordinance done. I regret that we had a bit of a back and forth in May and June over, you know, them trying to essentially not do an ordinance and ask us to pass the regulation. And our response basically was, you should pursue completion of your ordinance, which they did successfully. And frankly, I think Mr. Carr, while I respect his work and he did a great video, you know, I think a lot of this at the end of the day was one man's work, and it seemed to me a little bit of publicity here. And the fact that we're spending continued time having this discussion after there's a definitive ordinance in place seems to me just continued publicity. And I don't really appreciate that. I certainly don't agree with his ordinance the way it was drafted. I don't agree with the intent. I don't agree with a lot of the background that he provided. I certainly agree that we need to now comply with the ordinance. That's clear. That's black and white. But Mr. Carr's drafting of the language is not something that I can agree to personally.
Rob, towards the end of the meeting, you can, if you would like to schedule a time to have a public hearing over the new wording that Tom suggested, we could do that as well for the end of October.
So we have a motion on the table to deny the application. I think the reasons are that we have advice of counsel that we should be drafting our own regulation, and we don't need Mr. Carr's help in drafting our own regulation, even though he's offered. Thank you very much. I think administratively, it's not the preference, it's not Mr. Beecher's preference to have Mr. Carr as his partner in drafting. And that's advice of counsel. Furthermore, again, at least as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if the commission will agree to this, but I'm just flat out not comfortable with Mr. Carr's drafting the way it is in his presentation, his findings, and his reasons even for the.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, amongst us, that was a production.
I agree with Rob's sentiments, and I do believe when the ordinance was going through the continuation of this and us dedicating so much time when the town was going to vote on it, which I think the town voting on this is ultimately, that is the decision. That is more important than pushing through this permit. So I all of Rob's comments, I completely agree with and echo those.
Okay, I'm just gonna second it. Can we just vote?
Yeah, we can. It's been seconded. Alice, do you feel like we have sufficient reason for the record?
Yeah, I just have to create updates to follow the ordinance, and it was passed by public vote, and on the opinion of counsel for the commission to draft their own regulations. That should be sufficient.
So moved.
I would just like, I would be voting against the ordinance no matter what council said about it.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Thank you, Mr. Katz, for the record. And, you know, by the way, I should add before we actually move the vote, to be clear, I think Mr. Carr didn't, in my opinion, didn't do an honest job in terms of the conversations that were happening in May and June. I think unlike the Board of Selectmen that was fairly strong, black and white against this ordinance, I feel like you, my fellow commissioners, signaled a lot more middle ground. There were some people definitely for a ban. There were some people very against the ban. By the way, we had Mr. Dowdell has already voted against the moratorium. You know, so we have people on the record on both sides, and we have a lot of people in the middle. And I feel like the outcome, if we had needed to regulate this ourselves, wouldn't have been necessarily black and white. So I'm not sure that Mr. Carr would have been successful if we had voted ahead of the ordinance.
Rob, can
I
I
agree.
just suggest, Mr. Carr is a player or whatever, it seems, and I'm a new member to the board in the town. The production, the theatrical, and I apologize, it's opinion on my behalf, and I will couch this as opinion. His swaying of political aspects, I think we have to be, as a board, very conscious of time we allow and time we don't allow for political banter. Again, respectfully to my
Point of
fellow,
order, there's a motion
my
on the
fellow
floor.
commissioner, Mr. Katz, we are regulated by regulations, right, John?
The regulation says there's a motion on the floor and it needs a vote before you discuss any other topic.
Okay, so there's a motion been made and seconded. I'll call the question. The motion, just to clarify, is to deny the application A-22-1. All in favor of denial.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. It's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next item.